We're moving on to advanced landscapes now, but this is going to take us some time because we're going to need to create two material layers first and then the landscape material. We're going to try and do this in conjunction with having an actual landscape, but it is still going to have a little bit of crossover between making the layers and making the landscape material. So let's begin. I'm actually going to get this and nuke everything that I've done. So we're going to go File, New, and I'm going to use a default map again. I'm just going to delete this and go back to adding a landscape, and once again I'm going to have the settings that I had before with 2x2 and 4x4 for the components. So add that and create. I'm also once again going to set my light source to mobile just for the sake of not having the lines on screen, and just very quickly I'm going to paint in a bit of some hills, purely so I can actually have something to really look at and understand how it's all set up, so that as I'm doing my landscape I can see how it looks on the assets itself. So just very quickly, I'm just going to add some sculpting in. Now that'll do for the time being, and let's have one larger mountainy area over here that's in the distance. Oh, too much. Cool, that'll do, I don't mind too much. So I've got some flat areas to check it, some noisy areas to check it, and a big area to check it. Now, I'm going to delete these landscape layer infos that we had already created. And I'm going to keep simple landscape material just as a memory of all that could have been. And I'm going to go m_landscape _01. So this is going to be my landscape material. Now, how this is going to work is we're going to create a landscape that is going to have two sub-materials within it. So what I mean by that is it's going to have a grass layer and a dirt layer that are going to actually be made up from their own material layers. And I'll show you how this works. If you right click next to all of this and we go to materials, we can create a material function. And I want you to call this ml_grass. So upon double clicking, it's going to look like the material editor, because it essentially is, but there is a big difference. You'll notice that I'm no longer outputting to a standard material. Instead, I'm just outputting to a result. And this is essentially a way for me to create my very own material nodes, which is pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dirt layer to begin with. So to do this, I'm going to hold down T and I'm going to left click. And this in the texture is going to be set to the dirt texture that came in the Infinity Grasslands pack. So T_dirt. So there you can see we have a basic dirt texture. Next up, I'm going to hold down T, and this time around what I'm going to do is plug it into the normal for the dirt. Now if I wanted to plug in the diffuse and the normal into the result, I couldn't, because right now I don't have the standard color and roughness and normal and all of those inputs that I would usually have. Instead, I just have a single thing. But that's okay, because what we can do is we can drag off of this and type in set material, and you'll see that we have set material attributes. Now this looks like it has a single input, but this is where this is quite cool. If I go over to here and add an element, what I am actually able to do is add pins that create a material. So I'm going to add a base color, I'm going to add a roughness, I'm going to add a normal. So you can now see that we have 3 pins that would act as if they were one large make material attributes node. So if I plug this into base color, you can see now that it's applying it as if it was the base color on a standard material. Next up, I'm going to plug this into normal, and you can now see that we've got that happening too. However, we do have a bit of an issue with our dirt, and that is that we need to be able to set the roughness on it. At the moment, there's no value being set. And yeah, I could just plug a number into it, but that's not really where we want to end up on. What I ideally want to have is a roughness that is more rough around the dirt and a little less rough around where these rocks are, so we can get a little bit more of a shine on them. So how do we do that? Here's how. If I was to get the information coming out of the color data here, and I was to just grab a single channel of it, say the green channel. So if I got this, and I was to then look at it, I'm going to multiply it by a value of 1, which means it'll be just the channel. I'm going to start previewing that node. This is what I can see. You'll see that the rocks are highlighted as a grayer color than the dirt, which is a darker color. Now what we can do here is quite cool. We can get this and we can multiply it by, say, 3, just as an example. And in doing so, the brights got brighter, and yes, the darks did too, but if we use this in conjunction with a clamp and what's called a power node, we can create some very interesting effects from just pulling data out of the color data that's here. What I mean by that is, so at the moment, if a value was equal to 1 on the green channel, it would now be equal to 3, because I've multiplied it by 3. However, if I clamp this, if a value was equal to 3, it's now only equal to 1, because it doesn't let the value go above the max or below the minimum. Now why did I do this? I did this because I'm now going to use what's called a power node, and these are really useful nodes, because what they essentially do is they get the data coming in, and for each pixel they do a power of function on them. And what that means is, if you think about how this works, 1 to the power of 2 is equal to 1. However, 0.5 to the power of 2 is equal to 0.25, which means the lower a number is, when I power it, it's going to actually approach darker, while the lighter values are going to stay within a lighter range. So if I preview this, you can now see that by doing a power of, the rocks have stayed reasonably white. However, the dirt itself has gotten much darker. So this allows us to then create a blend between the dirt and the rocks that sets up the two roughness values that we would want to have here. So all I need to do that is add a linear interpolate, which allows us to blend between two values using an alpha value. So if I plug this in, at the moment it's blending between 0 and 1, so it's going to be exactly what we just saw. However, if this was to blend so that the dark dirt was equal to a value of 0.95, and the rock, on the other hand, was equal to a value of 0.5, you can see now that the rocks are going to be significantly smoother and the dirt's going to be quite rough. So if I plug this into my roughness value and I go to previewing the output result again, you can now see that we have a much rougher rock surface, but the rocks themselves, a much rougher dirt surface, but the rocks themselves can have a little bit of a shine. And if I go back to this lerp, I can actually change those values around. If I set that to 0, for instance, it's a bit more apparent. You can see that those rocks are they're getting that quite a shine as the light hits them directly. You can see it mostly on this one. But for the time being, I really am thinking that a value of about 0.4 is probably going to be fine. And that's going to be a good base for us to create a dirt material. Now, this is the initial setup that we have for one dirt layer, but there's a bit of a problem that we have, and I'm going to show you what that is. If I was to get this material that we've just created, which I called ML Grass, and I just realized was meant to be ML Dirt. That's okay. Let's just rename this. I'm going to go to ML Grass, and I'm going to rename this using F2 to ML Dirt. If I go into my landscape, and I add the dirt layer, so to do that I can go here, and then just get the dirt, and drag it into it. You can now see that dirt is outputting a result. Now I can't plug this in at the moment. However, if I go to this node within the properties that says use material attributes, this allows me to plug it straight in and create the dirt material plugged into here. Now this is going to have a couple of big issues when we first set it up, and I'll show you what those are. So I've got my advanced landscape. I'm going to drop it onto here. I forgot, sorry, you can't drag and drop. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to set the landscape material to be my landscape. Now, this is going to be applied to here. Now, I'm sure you can see the first issue that we've got. The tiling is incredible, but also if I was to stand here, you can see this repeating pattern going all across the landscape. So, how do we fix that? I'll show you that in the next session. So this was creating the basics of material functions, or in this case material layers, but next up we're going to look at how we handle landscape blending and material layer blending over a distance.